and joins me now. He's been our regular guest and a very popular one too, easily the most eloquent voice in English defending Iran, and I'm grateful that you're doing it again here, Professor. Let me start with the apparently banal and virtually unbelievable. Is it true that Iran might lose its place in the World Cup and be replaced by Ukraine? Can that possibly be true?
It's highly unlikely, but these so-called Iranians in Europe and North America that are hostile towards their own country and who support Western sanctions against ordinary Iranians, they have launched a campaign to ban Iran from participating, and they're trying to lobby the different governments to remove Iran from the World Cup, which ironically makes ordinary Iranians more hostile towards these regime change activists. But that is what they're trying to do, but there's no sign or indication that they are succeeding.
Well, let's work on the hypothesis that they fail, and very much hope that they will, though as you point out, nothing could be more guaranteed to make the Iranian people hate them than to campaign for their own country to be kicked out of the World Cup. But let's assume it goes ahead. You have a couple of interesting fixtures in the group stages, playing both England and the United States. What could possibly go wrong?
Yes, it will be somewhat interesting, both the match with the UK, because with all due respect to your British viewers, the UK government has a very long and dark history in our part of the world, and in Iran in particular. We all remember the 1953 coup in our school books, and those who are very old, they remember the coup itself. And also, of course, the United States, which has been our tormentor for the last 5 decades at least.
Well, it's the little Satan and the great Satan that you're playing. As I say, it could be quite fiery.
Yes, but of course, the little Satan is a reference to the government of the UK and the great Satan to the American government. But I understand that ordinary people in the UK would be very happy to see their team win the World Cup, and I wish ordinary UK citizens and American citizens all the best.
Well, I hope you don't beat England, but I hope you do beat the United States of America. But that's just the way I lean. Let's turn to weightier matters, Professor. You said those who are old enough, and I was born in 1954, so I'm not quite old enough to remember the coup. But I am old enough to remember something called the Iran nuclear deal. Whatever happened to that?
That's a good question. In 2015, Iran and the P5+1 struck a deal. It was basically negotiations between Iran and the United States, of course. And the Americans violated the deal from day one. And of course, the Europeans, since they always obey the United States, they too violated the deal. So Obama, while he was supposed to implement the deal and allow and actually facilitate, according to the deal, he was supposed to facilitate the normalization of Iranian business and trade. Behind the scenes, he was threatening banks, financial institutions, major companies and corporations, shipping companies, insurance companies, not to work with Iran. So that was a clear violation of the deal. Whereas the Iranians were in full compliance, as the International Atomic Energy Agency admitted many times. Then when Trump came, he tore up the deal, as we all know, and Biden, he continues to pursue Trump's policies. So the side that left the deal and violated the deal was the United States and the Europeans. So after Biden came to power, even though he did nothing to return to the deal, ultimately we had negotiations between Iran and the P4+1. And the Americans, since they had left the deal, they were not at the table, but they were sitting in buildings next door, negotiating indirectly. During the months of negotiations in Vienna, and I was in Vienna both for the recent talks and also in 2015 during the previous administration's talks. In Vienna, Iran was able to gain major concessions, and after a few months, we saw the EU give a text, and it met a lot of Iran's demands. The Iranians studied the text, they made some changes, and they said that these changes need to be made for the text to be acceptable. Joseph Borrell, a US ally and the EU foreign policy chief, said that the Iranian demands are reasonable. At that point, we all thought there would be a deal. We thought it was over. But then the Americans delayed their response, and when they did give a response, it was obviously very different from what Borrell was saying. And the interpretation in Tehran was that the Americans were stalling and they wanted to wait until after the November elections, and probably the elections in the Israeli regime as well.
Well, Joe Biden campaigned for the presidency on the promise that he would re-enter the deal. The policy of the Democrats was to remake the deal. After all, Trump only ripped it up because it was Obama that negotiated it in the first place. It was a kind of spite that motivated him. So why did he change his mind, or was he lying all along?
I think that he was probably lying all along, because on day one, when he became president, he used presidential decrees to basically overturn almost everything that Trump did through presidential decrees. One of the very few things that he left untouched were Trump's sanctions that were directed against ordinary Iranians, the maximum pressure sanctions. And by the way, these maximum pressure sanctions were not Trump's, they were Obama's. The maximum pressure sanctions that targeted women and children in Iran were first implemented under Obama. Then when he saw he was unable to force Iran to halt the enrichment of uranium, because it's Iran's sovereign right, he was forced to negotiate with Iran. He accepted Iran's right to negotiation, to nuclear enrichment, and they negotiated the 2015 deal, which Obama violated, as I said earlier. So what Trump was angry about was that he was saying that Obama should have continued to strangle ordinary Iranians. He should have continued with the maximum pressure sanctions, with those cruel and barbaric sanctions. But ultimately, what we saw was that when Biden came to power, he continued to pursue the same sanctions that Trump did. So he refused to remove any of the presidential decrees or to cast them aside or to sign new presidential decrees to end Trump's presidential decrees. And we are where we are today as a result.
Now, the decades-long hostility of the United States towards Iran shows no sign of dimming, and they have friends inside your country. That much is clear. It could hardly be otherwise. Before the Iranian Revolution, your country was ruled by a tyrant who was a puppet of the United States of America, and that tyranny had a comprador, not all of which fled the country. So even from the beginning, you had agents of the Americans inside your country. And of course, most Iranians have been born since the revolution. Iran is one of the youngest countries in the world, so they have to keep up their propaganda pressure. There are 3 television stations operating from London, beaming hostile propaganda into Iran. So, of course, there will always be in any big country, in any polity, whatever kind of polity it is, be people that don't like the regime, but sporadically, the Trojan horse opens its doors and out come some of those secreted therein. And that's what's been happening recently, hasn't it?
Absolutely. There are literally hundreds of TV channels. 3 of the key channels are in the UK. There are many in the United States. And they are constantly promoting violence. They are constantly playing on sectarian fault lines, ethnic fault lines. They are producing misinformation. In fact, the demise, the death of this young lady, Mahsa Amini, what caused the unrest was that these media outlets all lied on day one. They claimed with great confidence that she was tortured and murdered. And so there were people who came to the streets and protested. And then the footage came out. When she left the police van, she was not in handcuffs. She wasn't holding her head. There was no sign of physical pain. She went into a hall with other people. After a while, she stood and spoke with someone and then suddenly collapsed. Then in the autopsy, a large number of very well-known physicians examined the evidence, her body, and they found no sign of physical damage to the body that would be the result of some sort of violent attack. And also there's a clip of her father who was standing beside the body, and they were asking him to check her head, and he said he knows that there was no physical attack on her. There was no sign of any damage to the head and the body. So, but they had already caused but they had created this unrest, and then we saw what the United States does. The United States funds different terrorist organizations, like in the Komole and others in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Sistan Baluchistan of Pakistan. They fund other terrorist organizations alongside their allies, and they fund the former monarchists and the MEK, the Mujahideen Khal terrorist organization, which fought for Saddam Hussein and killed 17,000 Iranians in the 1980s. They have bases across Europe and North America. Their biggest base is in Albania, where there are thousands of trolls who work there. And they admit they are active in Iran. So all these different groups, they coordinated and rioted in different cities and in Tehran. And so there are no protests basically now. They're basically riots, and they are very well organized. Of course, they've died down, but every once in a while they suddenly light up again. And these are, as I said, they're very well coordinated. They're connected to these groups abroad, and people are very angry. And let me give you an example that just happened. This is anecdotal, but I think it is telling. 2 days ago in my own faculty at the University of Tehran, we had a faculty meeting. There were around 40 professors there, and the professors were very upset. They were being harassed by these rioters, a handful of students. And the irony is that most of those who were harassed were women. There were women professors, including the dean of the faculty, who's a woman. My boss at the University of Tehran is a woman. And who are the harassers? They're basically young men. So while in the West they're talking about the emancipation of women and how these rioters are fighting for human rights, in reality, what we are experiencing, what I've been experiencing, my colleagues have been experiencing, again, I'm saying this is anecdotal, but I think it's quite telling, is something very different.
Well, of course, they're big on women's rights in Iran, not so much in Saudi Arabia, and they don't give a toss about the women suffering under occupation in Palestine, a significant number of whom, with their children, have been killed. But not many Hollywood actresses are chopping off their hair for the plight of the women in Bethlehem or in Gaza.
Or in their own country. It's in Iran, women are pilots, they're helicopter pilots, they're taxi drivers, they're scientists, they're members of parliament. One of my colleagues at the sister University of Tehran, the University for Medical Sciences, she was the Minister of Health for 4 years. The Ministry of Health is the second largest ministry in the government, which has medical education, the healthcare network. It is huge. And we have women artists, we have women actresses, we have women directors. We have major women businessmen or businesswomen. This narrative in the West about women is simply because in Iran, women in the public, they're supposed to wear a headscarf. And not everyone does it anyway. No, not everyone did it anyway. But that's in Iran, the notion of the objectification of women, the commodification of women, the sexualization of women is different from in the West. So many in the West may disagree, but women in Iran and many people in Iran and many men in Iran see the world differently. It's not to control women. They believe that they're emancipating women. Now they can disagree, but to say that women in Iran are suppressed, I mean, women across the world, their situation is not ideal. But in London, where you are, a woman late at night would probably not, it would, at least my experience was that it would not be very smart for a woman to walk alone at night in many parts of London. A woman in Tehran, I can't say for this is true for the whole city, but in most parts of Tehran, a woman can walk alone at 10, 11 p.m. at night and feel pretty safe.
Professor Marandi, as always, a big pleasure to talk with you, and good luck in the World Cup when it comes, except against England. Thanks for joining me. That was Professor Mohammed Marandi of the American Studies Department at the University of Tehran.